Ever get that, like, a weird feeling about somebody
Oh, yeah.
where it's just like something's off?
Hmm.
And you try to, like, not think about it, but
Yeah.
but there's that, like, little voice in the back of your head.
Hmm.
That's kind of what we're talking about today.
Okay.
The San Francisco witch killers.
Wow.
So you sent us an episode of the Morbid podcast.
Right.
In this case, it's a wild ride, man.
Yeah.
Delusion, violence, just the dark side of what people can be like.
I think the thing that got me about this case was how relatable it starts.
Oh, really?
You have Karen Barnes,
Okay.
small town girl from Georgia,
Okay.
wants to be an actress,
Sure.
goes to San Francisco, the classic story.
Yeah.
Big city, new life,
Yeah.
But things go south pretty quickly.
Yeah, the podcast does a really good job of, like, painting the picture of who Karen was.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to San Francisco, she has a car accident, she has to go back home.
Oh.
And then when she comes back to San Francisco, she seems almost like vulnerable,
Yeah.
like looking for connections in a city that can be pretty lonely sometimes.
That makes sense. And I think that's where she meets Michael and Susan Carson.
Okay.
They were this kind of nomadic couple, really into this strange belief system.
Okay.
They kind of blended like distorted Islamic ideas with this like deep fear of witches and demons.
So they were kind of like a charismatic couple.
Yeah, they were, and they always had drugs.
Oh, wow.
And they were really good at finding people like Karen,
Yeah.
people who were, searching for something, for a community.
And the podcast Morbid, they really highlighted how strange these beliefs were, even for people in that scene, like the counterculture scene.
Yeah. Karen's friend Katie, she describes Susan as like the embodiment of evil, which is, I mean, that's a pretty strong statement, especially considering, the kind of people they were hanging out with. Right.
But it shows you the kind of magnetism they had, right? Like they were able to attract people, even though they were like really erratic.
Yeah.
They'd squat in apartments, accuse people of witchcraft, rant about the apocalypse. It was like their own little cult of paranoia.
Wow.
And Karen, sadly, she became their target.
And then in March of '81, the worst possible thing happens. Karen's found murdered.
Oh, no.
In her apartment, and it's a horrific scene. Her skull's crushed, she's been stabbed multiple times, her body's wrapped in a blanket.
God.
And to make it even more creepy, the apartment's covered in crayon drawings signed Susan.
Oh, that's so creepy. What really gets me is how planned out it seemed. It wasn't just like, a heat of the moment thing. They cleaned the whole apartment, got rid of almost all the evidence. This was like a ritual.
Wow.
Makes those crayon drawings even more like disturbing. It's like a creepy calling card, like a look into Susan's mind. Yeah. Terrifying. And the police they're totally lost,
Mm-hmm.
They don't know anything about Michael and Susan.
Yeah.
And the counterculture community, they don't really trust the cops, understandably.
Right.
So nobody's talking.
Yeah.
So the investigation goes nowhere. And Michael and Susan,
What happened?
they disappear.
Wow. Just like that.
Gone.
Hmm.
But they're not just hiding out. They're on the run, hitchhiking, living in abandoned cabins, getting more and more paranoid. Like every day they're alone. Their crazy ideas just get stronger. Like they're in their own little world, feeding their own delusions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like their escape just makes them more and more insane. The further they get from everyone else, the deeper they go into this delusion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their violence is only going to get worse. It's all fueled by paranoia, this feeling that they're right, that they have to do this. And their next victim, a marijuana farm worker in Alder Point, California,
Wow.
Clark Stevens. Wrong place, wrong time. Runs into Michael and Susan. And like always, Susan, she's the one who starts it.
Oh, okay.
She decides he's a demon, a threat, to their crazy little world.
And what happens?
Well, the podcast, it goes into a lot of detail about the murder, and it's really brutal. Michael tries to shoot Clark. It doesn't work at first.
Oh, God.
And then he finally does it, shoots him a bunch of times. And then, this is the weird part, they try to burn his body in a pile of manure.
Why manure?
That's what stuck with me too. It's not just how violent it was. It's like they were trying to do some weird ritual, like they were trying to make him less than human. It's really disturbing.
It makes you wonder, are they actually insane? Or are they just using this whole witch thing as an excuse?
Right. It's a hard question
Huh.
because they're clearly smart. They plan things out. They manipulate people. But they also seem to really believe all this crazy stuff.
It's what makes their stories so fascinating.
Yeah.
And so scary. This mix of delusion and cold, calculated violence. It's hard to know what's really driving them.
And that question, it's going to stay with us as we keep going with their story.
Okay.
So we left off with Michael and Susan on the run, right? Their paranoia is getting worse. They're getting more violent.
Right.
But the podcast, Morbid, it doesn't just focus on the murders. It kind of gets into their heads a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
And their capture, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, you see this weird mix of, like, desperation, but also they're still being, like, really smart,
Yeah.
Like, Michael gets picked up by the police, actually, for hitchhiking.
Oh, wow.
But they're looking for, like, a rape suspect.
Okay.
So they let him go. It's like fate was giving them a chance to, like, stop.
Wow.
But they were just too far gone,
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thought. Like, if they had been caught then, maybe John Hellier would still be alive.
Yeah.
But they just kept going, And John, he's a truck driver, and he offers them a ride, a place to stay, just trying to help.
Right.
And that kindness, it ends up getting him killed. Susan, she's just so paranoid. She says he's a witch.
Oh, God.
Like he's got to be eliminated. It's just so sad, you know? Like this guy, he just wanted to help, and they twist it into this threat.
It's really tragic. Like, they're not even just killing people they see as enemies anymore. It's anyone who, like, challenges their realities.
Yeah.
Even if they're just trying to be nice.
It's terrifying. And then it all leads to this crazy chase, shootout with the cops.
Oh, wow.
Like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But it's real, and it's really dark. And it's during this whole crazy capture that their little fake world falls apart. Their real names come out. James Clifford Carson and Susan Thornell Hamilton.
Sure.
So Michael, this like mystic guy, he's just some regular dude, with a family, a past. He just left it all behind.
It's crazy how the podcast, like, really digs into that, Michael was a nice Jewish boy from Arizona, had a wife, a daughter. It's hard to, like, square that with this cold-blooded killer.
I know. It's like, how does that happen?
It makes you think about, like, human nature, like what turns a regular person into a murderer. It's a question that people are still trying to figure out.
In Susan's story, it's just as crazy. She's from a rich family, like trust fund baby, the whole thing. And she just throws it all away to join Michael in this messed up fantasy world.
The podcast actually talks about how LSD might have played a part in her like transformation.
Really?
Yeah, which makes sense. Like back then everyone was experimenting, looking for like enlightenment, and sometimes it led people down some really bad paths.
Right. It's like they both wanted to escape something,
Yeah.
Michael, he wanted to escape like normal life, and Susan, she wanted to escape her privilege. And they found each other and created this shared delusion that destroyed everything.
And then in the courtroom, it's like this whole delusion becomes a show.
Oh yeah.
They're acting so crazy, it's hard to tell what's real and what's fake, ranting, raving, threatening people, trying to convert everyone to their beliefs.
So what about that witchcraft defense they use? I read a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. It's basically, they claimed that Karen was a witch and that she was, like, draining Susan's life force or something.
Wow.
And that God told them to kill her. It's hard to even understand.
Yeah.
But it shows how much they believed this stuff. Like, they weren't just trying to get out of trouble. They really thought they were doing the right thing.
I mean, did anyone actually believe them?
Not really. The judge, the jury, even their own lawyers, they all seem pretty skeptical. But the media, they loved it. It fed into this whole fascination with, like, the occult and the dark side of the counterculture.
Right. It's like their case became this symbol of the times. You know?
Yeah.
Like the end of the 60s, the fear of the 80s, and the podcast Morbid, it really captures that feeling like something bad was coming,
Yeah, and that feeling just gets stronger when Susan explodes during sentencing.
That happened.
It's like a 40-minute rant filled with rage, and she's just so defiant, no remorse at all. It's really scary.
Wow. And Michael?
He's calm, almost like smug even. He says killing Karen was a righteous act, like he was following God's law. It's chilling,
It's the scariest people are the ones who really think they're right.
Exactly. And that's what gets them convicted. 25 years to life. Which even back then seemed like not enough.
It makes you think,
Uh,
were they crazy or were they just like really good at playing the system?
it's a question people still debate.
And it's a question that kind of hangs over the whole case even now, as we think about the victims and their families. So Michael and Susan, the self-proclaimed San Francisco witch killers.
Right.
We've seen how they kind of lost themselves,
Yeah.
went down this road of crazy beliefs and violence.
Mm-hmm.
But as we kind of wrap up their story, there's still these big questions.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most unsettling ones is whether there were more victims.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the podcast, it kind of hints at other crimes they might be connected to, things that were never like officially linked to them.
It's a scary thought,
Yeah, or cool.
Like how many other families are out there wondering what happened to their loved ones?
Exactly. And back then, DNA technology, it wasn't what it is now. So it's totally possible that there are other cases out there just waiting to be solved.
It's kind of a sad reminder that justice, it doesn't always, work out perfectly.
No, it doesn't.
And for some families, closure, it might never come.
That's the really hard part,
And to make things even worse, both Michael and Susan, they could be eligible for parole again in 2030.
Wow, really? That's hard to believe. After everything they did.
I know, it makes you question the whole system.
Yeah. Like, can people like that really change?
Yeah.
Is there a point where their beliefs are just so strong that there's no coming back?
And the podcast, it makes it clear that neither of them, they've never said they were sorry
Right.
for anything. Michael, he actually said he'd rather stay in prison than give up his beliefs.
It's like a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people, they're the ones who really believe they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, no matter how twisted it is.
Exactly. So it's like, what do we do? As a society, how do we deal with people like that?
It's a tough question.
It is. Do we just punish them? Or do we try to help them change, even when it seems impossible?
Those are big questions, man.
They are. And they make us think about some uncomfortable things, like the limits of compassion, the power of fanaticism.
The San Francisco witch killers, they might be behind bars, but their story, it's still with us.
Yeah. It casts a shadow over the families of the victims, and it reminds us that darkness, it can be anywhere.
So as we finish up this deep dive, what can we learn from all of this? From this story of delusion and violence?
I think it's a reminder to be careful, to trust our gut when something feels wrong.
Okay.
And to be wary of people who preach hate, who try to divide us, because those kinds of ideas, they can be really dangerous.
It's also a reminder that evil, it doesn't always look like a monster, It can be hidden in plain sight.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to remember to have compassion, not just for the victims, but also for people who are struggling with their mental health. Because mental illness, it doesn't excuse violence, but it can explain it sometimes.
You've hit the nail on the head, This case, it makes us question everything. Good and evil, sanity and madness.
It's a reminder that the line between normal and horrifying, it can be really thin.
Yeah.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of the San Francisco witch killers.
Wow.
We hope you found it interesting. And if you're looking for more deep dives into fascinating stories, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Yeah, definitely.
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions.